I'll talk about how plagiarism, burnout, and gaming the system are harming open source. I'll explain why contributors can't fix this problem by themselves. I'll talk about how adopting contributions and credit policy helps maintainers, since maintainers have to do it. And then I'll give an overview of our guide to developing a contributions and credit policy. We'll have time for Q&A maybe. And I just want to say up front, credit for this work goes to me, Valerie Aurora, Maria Mateka, Marco Sanz, Martin Winter, and the other members of the RIPE Open Source Working Group. And you could be on that list too. I'll explain how. All right, a little bit about me. I'm a systems architect consultant at Bouwshock Systems. It's Bouwshock. I always want it to be Bouwshock. I live in Amsterdam. I'm interested in digital sovereignty because I think it will result in simpler software, which I like. I have over 25 years in open source software and networking, file systems, the Linux kernel, and leadership. I've been both a maintainer and a contributor. I'm the lead author and advocate for the most popular code of conduct in tech spaces. And my work has been plagiarized multiple times. So I'd love, if first, everyone who's willing to raise your hand ever, raise your hand right now. This just is getting a baseline. Okay, how many people here have been plagiarized or know somebody who's been plagiarized with open source contributions? Yeah, oh, wow, okay, so pretty much 100% of the people willing to raise their hands. Got to get your baseline. So the terminology I'm going to use for this talk is that a maintainer is someone who has control over how contributions are credited by the main open source project. This is often shortened as has the commit bit. It's harder to steal code when you don't control who gets credit. It's possible. Contribution is anything. It's not just code. It's documentation, it's testing, it's packaging, review, advocacy, debugging, education, all that kind of stuff that contributes to the success of the project. And a contributor is someone who contributes to a project but is not a maintainer. Okay, so what does plagiarism look like in open source software? I'm going to start with a real-world example. Ariel Mikulus is a developer who debugged and fixed a serious Linux kernel bug. It was a memory corruption of the task struct. That means very bad. He sent it to the maintainer. He made the requested changes. He signed off on it. He resent it. And then later on was looking around and noticed that the maintainer had checked in a very similar patch. It was like 10 lines. One line was different, approximately, with the maintainer as the author. He wrote on a blog post, which included, "My first contribution to the kernel was a really frustrating and discouraging experience dealing with people who do not think it is important to get proper recognition for your work." So, if you haven't seen this, you're lucky. This kind of plagiarism happens constantly. Here's some quotes from various people on the Hacker News discussion. "It happens to OSS projects all the time and simply discourages further contributions. I used to think it was fine to take someone else's contribution and then create a total rewrite of it in my own branch and merge that. Holy moly. Someone had to do the same with me for me to realize that it kind of sucks. Congratulations, you developed empathy. The first few times I submitted suggested patches to the Linux kernel, I never asked for, nor received, any credit. This was somebody who was making the argument that you shouldn't care. He also named the Linux kernel developer who plagiarized his work. Funny. But complaining about plagiarism doesn't work if you're the person who is plagiarized. Spontaneous trait transference is one element of shooting the messenger. If you complain about plagiarism, people associate you with plagiarism, and they don't trust you because you're a plagiarist. You've seen this in various forms. The bearer of bad news, not very popular. Maintainers are often the ultimate authority in their project, and so if you complain to the maintainer that they're being unethical, they're unlikely to do something about it. Even if there are people who can influence the maintainer, they usually want to avoid conflict. I have tried this a few times. Hey, didn't you notice this publicly archived mailing list showing that this person is plagiarizing over and over? Oh, well, you know, it could have been anything. Who knows? It was an accident 50 times a year. Sometimes maintainers are just burned out, though. I want to be clear. There's the maintainer side of this issue. There's plenty of people being very ethical, trying their hardest, and that get wrongly accused of stealing credit. So a contributor sends in a patch. The maintainers are too overworked to review the patch. They never even see it. Later, a maintainer happens to fix the same problem because it was getting in their way that week. And the contributor says, hey, why did you rewrite my patch and take the credit? So this looked like plagiarism, but it wasn't. And it's because the maintainer was too overworked to see the original contribution. Gaming the system adds to maintainer burnout. So I talked to a lot of maintainers while working on this, and I can summarize this issue as, how can I do as little work as possible to get green boxes on GitHub? Green boxes are ridiculous. I know way too many people who game this particular system. That Hacker News discussion included somebody saying, hey, I've noticed this trend where somebody will lightly rewrite one of my patches. I go look at all their GitHub contributions, and it's all the same, cut and pasted from somebody else's work. So this can also look like LLM-generated documentation that simply repeats the names of the variables outside of the variable names. It's very annoying. Bug reports that aren't about bugs, or bug fixes that don't fix bugs. They do something else. Minor grammatical changes or reformatting things. Or, nation-state actors creating sock puppets to harass maintainers into handing over their maintainership to hackers, right? So there's a bunch of different ways that maintainers are suffering, and this is getting worse. Okay, so contributors can't fix plagiarism, but other maintainers are already overworked. So what can we do? I have another question. What if maintainers could reduce plagiarism in open source and reduce their workload? We can have both. So here is my proposal, and I'll explain why it works. So our solution is a public written contributions and credit policy. I've learned not to bother naming these things well in advance. In like a year, there will be a standard name for this, but today we're calling it contributions and credit policy. All you do is you write down what contributors should expect from your project when they send in a contribution. So what kind of contributions you want, if any, when they should expect a response. I think this is important for workload. If you say, in 1 month, I will review all of the contributions, people will wait for 1 month before they email you. How they should respond to your review. Should they get their own changes back within 2 weeks, or you're going to say, hey, I'm just going to do whatever I want? How credit will be assigned, so people know in advance before they start contributing, and what to do if the policy isn't being followed. Policies are meaningless without enforcement. So how does a policy reduce work for maintainers? Well, let's start with you get fewer unwanted contributions. There's a lot of projects that are tired of people submitting the exact same feature, which is actually making life worse for them. There's less arguing with contributors about when you should reply or whether the coding style is correct, that sort of thing, because there's a document. You spend less time trying to decide how to handle weird situations. So maintainers told me about a bunch of difficult cases, like when somebody sends a contribution and then the maintainers rewrite it so much, at one point is it a suggestion or a bug report more than it's a contribution of original work, right? How do you decide when that line is crossed? Well, make a decision, write it down, and then you just look it up. You can attract contributors who like the policy and are willing to follow it. You can repel contributors who thrive on conflict, ambiguity, and gaming the system. If there's somebody who makes trouble and likes to game the system and steal other people's work, they're attracted to projects that have fewer rules. So if you're looking for people who are productive and helpful, give them a little more documentation. Finally, if somebody thinks you stole credit from them, they're more likely to email you or contact you via the method in your policy than write a blog post that gets thousands of people mad at you on the internet, right? If the maintainer decides whether to adopt a policy, how do policies stop maintainers from plagiarism, right? If you are a plagiarizing maintainer, why would you adopt a policy? Or maybe you could just adopt a policy and lie about it. Well, here we go. We can make a policy, a lack of a policy, a red flag for a project. So what we're looking for is to make this such a common practice that people notice when somebody refuses to make a public commitment to how they will credit work. Maintainers who want to steal credit are unlikely to say that. They're unlikely to write down, "I will steal your work." If they do, they might just tell you. For me, the issue is when you don't know that somebody's going to take credit for your work, and I'll talk about that in a bit. So if they do adopt a policy and they do make some sort of promise that they're not willing to keep, that whole thing with spontaneous trait transference and shooting the messenger, it's less intense when you're like, hey, you said you would do that. You wrote it down and you're not doing it. People are much more likely to get mad at the person who broke their word than they are at somebody saying, hey, you didn't follow the rules. We're all playing by the rules. I think this might work because adopting a policy helps your project right away. I'm sure that you can, if you're a maintainer, you can think of annoying contributor behavior that causes you trouble that you could fix with one of these policies. Or if not fix, you could at least be like, look at the policy. We're done with this conversation. And I just want to say that this technique worked for conferences. So this conference has a code of conduct that applies to it. I actually wrote a number of these words. I released it under a CC0 license so that more people would use it rather than getting more credit for it. So most tech conferences have a code of conduct very similar to this. And actually last month, there was a conference in Amsterdam I really wanted to go to. I noticed it had all male speakers, and then I went looking for the code of conduct, and then there wasn't one. And I asked the organizer, and he was like, nope, we're not having a code of conduct. And I did not waste my time on that conference, where people probably would have been a jerk to me. All right, so we created a guide to developing your own policy. It explains why a policy is necessary and what to include in one. It lists some example policies. We'd love some contributions in this area. It has its own contributions and credit policy. Recursion is good. Contributions are very welcome. It's extremely short contributions and credit policy. You are welcome to borrow it. The contributors include myself, Maria Mateka, Marco Sands, Martin Winter, and the other members of the RIPE open source working group. You can look it up. Maria kindly made us a GitHub repo for that. We would really love any work or contributions. If you want any help getting this set up, let me know. All right, so I just want to give you an example of the kind of resource that's in this guide. So a question people immediately get hung up on is how to assign credit. So plagiarism is fairly well designed when it comes to the written word, prose, art, paintings, things like that. There's a lot of court cases, etc. Software is harder for a number of reasons. Most software, especially open source software, is a collaborative work, right? Multiple people are working together on every single line of code. Idiom's best practices and standards force code to resemble other code. So I remember one of the court cases about stealing code involved the Unix error number, errno header file. And it's like, these two files are the same because they're the standard Unix error numbers. They have to be the same. Copying similar code and altering it is actually best practice, right? This is a thing that you would be much less likely to do in an academic research paper or a novel. So people ask, who wrote a line of code? Who deserves credit? And I'll put that in there as another version. My answer is, I don't know. For example, early in my career, I was talking to somebody, they misunderstood me, said, oh, that's a really great idea. I was like, that is a great idea, but I didn't have that idea. Neither of us had the idea. Nobody owns ideas, actually. What you're trying to do is reward specific behavior by giving people credit and appreciation. So I ask, what behavior do I want to reward? And this is a thing that will be different depending on your project. Some projects want first-time contributions. And so they might say, your first-time contribution, no matter how much we rewrite it, we will give you first author credit. Reviewing other people's contributions, you can increase the amount of credit for that. You could say, I don't want any new features, only bug fixes. You can say, I want nothing, do not talk to me. I will send you an angry email if you do. I will mock you on the internet. You might want fan art. I would love to have fan art of any of my projects. So here's some representative fan art. Fan art is great. So summary, I want you to remember this when this comes up, because it will if you adopt a policy. Give credit in ways that reward the behaviors that you want. So quickly, some examples of existing contributions and credit policies. In order to keep SQLite completely free and unencumbered by copyright, the project does not accept patches. Let's see, Filippo Valsarda's projects says cryptography and security projects require an unusually high degree of code review. As a result, you should expect any code contributions to be re-implemented rather than merged. This came out after the XZ backdoor. You can see how it's much harder to get a backdoor in if the maintainer rewrites it. However, he does try to use co-authored bylines to give credit. Lightstream wants bug fixes only, and including a specific request for documentation fixes. All right, and one last thing I want to say, policy should be honest and realistic, not aspirational. If you can't review every contribution in a week, don't say you will. Say, look at your past and be like, wow, it takes us 3 months to do this. Okay, put 3 months in your policy. Describe things as they are, not how you want them to be. For example, the X Screensaver project gives no credit to contributors except when they contribute new hacks, which are basically screensavers. Many years ago, I sent in a bug fix to X Screensaver. I did not expect credit. I did not get it. That's not a problem. I was just excited that I found a bug. A quote from someone on Linux Weekly News, X Screensaver has never pretended to be anything but what it is, let alone a nurturing community. That's fine. The important thing is that I had the right expectations coming in as a contributor, and they were met. All right, so it's just semi-happy ending about that story I started out with Area Moleculus and the stolen contribution. After that blog post, eventually the maintainer apologized. I'm sorry about the way I handled your patch. I should have spent more time working with you to develop your patch. I agree that the reported by tag doesn't properly reflect the contribution you made. I should have realized that at the time. But I'll note that the GitHub repository still shows that commit as being authored by the maintainer. All right, time for Q&A, and please go to the repository. Thanks.
Thank you.